Today, we're jumping into one of the most bizarre and, honestly, one of the most important cautionary tales in the entire book of Numbers. It's an incredible story about a terrified king, a greedy prophet, and a donkey that could see way more than the man riding it. All right, so if you want to follow along, we're going to be exploring a pretty big chunk of scripture, Numbers chapters 22 all the way through 25. It's a wild ride that unpacks some really heavy themes like greed, power, and who's really in control. And this right here, this is the central question of the whole story. We've got a guy who can genuinely communicate with God, a man with incredible spiritual power, but his heart is being pulled in a completely different direction. And that conflict, it's what drives this entire crazy narrative.
Okay, so let's set the scene. The people of Israel are camped out in the plains of Moab. They're literally on the doorstep of the Promised Land. And their massive numbers, plus all their recent victories, have sent a shockwave of terror through the entire region. Especially for one guy, King Balak of Moab.
So here are our two main players. On one side, you've got King Balak, who is just paralyzed by fear. He knows he can't win a military battle, so he decides to try some spiritual warfare. His big idea? Hire Balaam, a famous diviner, basically a prophet for hire, who was known far and wide for the power of his words. Balak's plan is simple: pay this guy to curse the Israelites out of existence.
And you can tell just how desperate Balak was by this number. He sends messengers with a bag full of cash on a 640-kilometer journey. That's about 400 miles. Think about that in the ancient world. It's a massive trek, all to hire this one specific guy. Balak was clearly not messing around.
So Balaam does the right thing at first. He asks God, and the answer could not be more direct. Do not go. You can't curse them because they are blessed. Case closed, right? You'd think so. But Balak just sends an even bigger, more important group of officials back with promises of even more money. And this is where you can almost see Balaam's resolve start to crack.
So Balaam, hoping for a different answer, asks God again. And this time, God tells him he can go. Now this leads us to the most famous, and let's be honest, the absolute strangest part of this story. Because on the road to Moab, divine intervention shows up in a very, very unusual way.
Okay, wait a minute. This is a point that can be super confusing. If God gave him permission, why was he suddenly very angry that Balaam was on his way? Well, the answer tells us everything we need to know about what was really going on in Balaam's heart.
You see, God saw right through him. Balaam wasn't going to Moab because he wanted to be obedient. He was going because he was obsessed with the promise of wealth and fame. He was chasing what the New Testament later calls the wages of unrighteousness. So yeah, God gave him permission, but he was furious with the greedy, selfish motives behind the action.
So as Balaam is traveling, an angel with a drawn sword is standing right there in the road. But the great prophet, the man who supposedly talks to God, he's completely oblivious. He sees nothing. The only one who sees this terrifying angel is his donkey. And 3 different times, the donkey veers off the path to save Balaam's life. And each time, the prophet gets furious and beats the poor animal.
And then comes the moment this story is famous for. God opens the donkey's mouth and it speaks. It asks a perfectly logical question that just completely exposes how blind and foolish Balaam is being. I mean, can you even imagine the shock of that moment?
It's only then, after he's been rebuked by his own donkey, that God opens Balaam's eyes, and he finally sees the angel. The angel basically says, "This animal just saved your life." In this one incredibly humiliating moment, God uses a simple donkey to shatter the arrogance of this world-famous prophet, showing him that he was completely spiritually blind.
Now, you would think that after an argument with your donkey and a near-death encounter with an angel, you might just, turn around and go home. But not Balaam. He keeps going. He gets to Moab, and King Balak is ready to get down to business. He paid for curses, and he wants them now. So Balak takes Balaam up to a high place with a great view of the Israelite camp. They build altars, they offer sacrifices, everything is set. But when Balaam opens his mouth to speak a curse, only a blessing comes out. Balak is frustrated, but he thinks, okay, maybe it's just the location. So he takes him to a new spot. Same result, another blessing. He tries one last desperate time from a third location, only to have a third, even more powerful blessing pour out of Balaam's mouth.
At this point, King Balak is just losing his mind. His grand plan has completely spectacularly failed. He hired the best spiritual gun for hire in the world, and all he's gotten are these beautiful poetic blessings for his enemies. It's this incredible demonstration that you just can't overpower God's will with human schemes.
But the story isn't over, not even close. Balaam, still desperate for his paycheck, can't just go home empty-handed. He failed to curse Israel directly, but he figures out a backdoor, a loophole. If he can't get God to curse them, maybe he can get them to curse themselves.
And this is where the story takes a really dark turn. This is where Balaam's true colors just shine through. He gives King Balak a whole new strategy, a wicked scheme that has nothing to do with spells and everything to do with temptation.
The plan was insidious. It wasn't a frontal assault. It was a cultural and spiritual poison. He advised Balak to have Moabite women seduce the Israelite men, and through that relationship, lead them into idolatry, specifically the worship of a local god called Baal of Peor. And the terrifying part? It worked. The Israelites walked right into the trap. Well, the consequence for this massive betrayal was immediate, and it was catastrophic. The very anger from God that Balaam had tried and failed to summon with his curses was now unleashed on Israel, all because of their own actions.
A deadly plague ripped through the Israelite camp. And the death toll, it's just staggering. 24,000 people died. In the end, Balaam's wicked advice turned out to be far more deadly than any curse he could have ever spoken.
And at the absolute peak of this rebellion, while the whole nation is weeping, an Israelite leader named Zimri brazenly parades a Midianite princess, Cosbi, right into his tent in front of everyone. It was this shocking act of defiance, and that's when Phinehas, the grandson of the high priest, filled with this zeal for God, grabs a spear, follows them in, and executes them both. And with that one decisive act, the plague stopped.
The fallout from all this was huge. Phinehas' action saved the nation. Zimri's defiance had devastating consequences for his entire tribe. And what about Balaam, the man who started it all? Well, he finally got his wages. He was later found among the Midianites, and he was killed by the Israelite army.
And really, that brings us to the final thought. The story of Balaam is ancient, but its warning feels, well, timeless. It's this powerful reminder that having talent, or even spiritual gifts, is absolutely no protection against the corrosive power of greed and compromise. It really makes you ask, where in our own lives are we tempted to use our gifts not for their real purpose, but just for our own gain, chasing the modern version of the wages of unrighteousness?